Welcome to Email After Hours by SenderScore, powered by Validity.
We're your hosts. My name is Guy Hansen.
And I'm Danielle Gallant, and this is Email After Hours. Today, we are diving into the two little letters that have been top of mind for everyone lately. Those are AI, or artificial intelligence, of course. And whether you love it or you hate it, or you're just plain tired of hearing about it, there is no escaping the fact that AI isn't going anywhere. And while email marketers don't need to bow down to our robot overlords yet, they should be aware of how AI is changing the email ecosystem and how to use this technology to make their campaigns more efficient.
That's right. And here to help us out today is AI fanatic Eric Stell. Eric's an email deliverability specialist at Map Digital, one of our Validity partners. And his day job is all about some of our favorite acronyms that you hear us talking about all the time: SPF, DKIM, DMARC more recently. Today, we're going to be diving into a different realm with Eric: AI in email marketing. So from emerging tools like GPT to Eric's insights on authentication, safe words, and the potential impact of AI on this year's election outcomes, we're in for a fascinating discussion. Get ready for a deep dive on Email After Hours. Welcome to the show, Eric. It's so cool to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we always kick off the episodes with an icebreaker question. And this one, I think I've said before, gives me a little bit of anxiety depending on how our guest answers. So, Eric, how many unread emails do you currently have? Are you an inbox zero person, or do you have 10,000 messages?
So many. It's nigh unavoidable because once you trim down your preferences, inevitably you're going to have some that you want to hold on to. And I almost wish, in addition to the promotional and inbox tabs, they had I want to read this later, but remind me that it's there tab. And Leave On Unread does that for me. So yes, unfortunately, I am not an inbox zero guy.
That's absolutely fine. And yeah, we'll come back to that in a little while.
I can live with it.
But before we dive into today's topic, let's kick things off with a slightly broader question. Eric, we introduced you explaining your role as a deliverability specialist at Map Digital. Can you give us a quick overview of what your day-to-day job looks like?
Well, on a day-to-day basis, it is a wide and changing landscape. Common things like emails being blocked to less common things like log searches and making sure things were received. And in addition to keeping myself up on changes in the industry, because what was once the end-all be-all in the past is no longer, and it's constantly evolving landscape as the bad guys come up with new ways to be bad and the good guys come up with new ways to fight them, and then new measures get put in place, and then everybody struggles to have the entire email ecosystem adopt them, or the entire ecosystem doesn't like it and then they don't adopt. So we've seen a lot of different things come and go over the years, but yeah, it's definitely, it keeps me on my toes.
I think that could have been your entire role in the last few years, is just staying on top of industry news, which is something, of course, that we do here at Validity. And also, of course, deliverability is our bread and butter. So naturally, as AI gains traction in email marketing, it's really fascinating to explore its impact on deliverability. So, Eric, can you maybe highlight some of the most innovative uses of AI that MAP is leveraging to boost deliverability or engagement?
Here at MAP, we've been developing means to try and streamline the campaign generation using AI. There are a lot of different ways that AI is being applied. Some are a little more clandestine than others. From our perspective, from the perspective of the white hat, trying to do legitimate business, AI can help. If a marketer, say, lacks inspiration on a particular collateral, you can feed in a couple prompts into AI and say, hey, give me 2 paragraphs on a highlight about this image. And then it goes and runs it down. And then you can say, okay, take those highlights and turn it into a cohesive promotional piece. And you can get as detailed or as not detailed as you want based off of your prompting. We strive to make it a tool that marketers can use to help improve their performance and also make more compelling collateral, which in the end benefits senders from the standpoint of Engaging collateral promotes that open, that click, that in items that not only the sender wants to see, but the providers also want to see.
That's awesome. Now, we've heard a lot lately about how major mailbox providers like Microsoft and Gmail and Yahoo are increasingly using AI to manage emails and mailboxes. And of course, we know, Eric, that you have a role at Morg on the AI working group. So maybe you've got some insight into this, although we know that's a closed shop in terms of what you can tell us happens at Morg. But can you maybe tell us more broadly about how some of these new AI tools are changing the email landscape and what marketers need to know to stay ahead?
There's a lot that goes on the particular working group, and a lot of that is designed to come up at conferences where we can expose ideas to the larger group and submit them to peer inspection, peer review, and discussion in order to help make this tool into something that can be used for the good of email marketing. There are a lot of different things that we've seen. Google has done releases about how they are having their AI look for things that might have been created by AI. So we have robots watching robots. Other businesses have popped up around the use of AI in the email processes. For example, using bots to simulate human interaction during warm-up, which is, I have certain feelings on that. And right now, I think it's new enough to the point where providers haven't necessarily evolved a stance on it. They know it's there. They know people are doing it, but people haven't said, don't do it or don't do it. I think fundamentally, there's no substitute for human interaction in the warm-up and email management process. The introduction of artificiality in that process, it may seem like a boon in some of the more tough to get into inboxes, but fundamentally, your campaigns will fall off or not sustain once the actual audience of recipients outweighs the presence of the bots.
And presumably, just as an aside, if bots are watching bots, that might become obvious at some point, just in the way that engagement actually happens, right?
Right. I think right now, generative AI is at a point where I always tell everyone not to worry about AI until you start to go to like a Mid-Journey or some sort of image generation, and it generates fingers correctly. Because sometimes it has problems with the small details. And that's why when you use AI for formatting collateral or writing a letter or doing anything else that AI does, it still requires proofreading for things like nuance and also just cohesion, because it can get the facts right. Just because you can recite every medical term for the part of the body doesn't mean you know how to do surgery.
And I think that's a wonderful example. And I think too, we've kind of edged on, I don't know, maybe I've just been watching too many Marvel movies lately, but the good, the bad, the Avengers, and as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. As AI becomes more prevalent in email marketing, there are some obvious potential downsides of artificiality in email campaigns, right? To your point, you may not have context or cohesion. And another way that this can be particularly concerning is really about recipient trust and engagement. So do you think there's a risk of AI-generated emails negatively impacting deliverability or a brand's reputation?
I think with any tool, there's always potential for it. Sometimes AI can really jump the shark when you're creating terms. And if you just are dealing in mass and don't necessarily review what the AI creates for you, then it can create these Franken emails that are just sort of on point and maybe relates to the topic, but it sounds like not necessarily like the language that they're promoting in as a second language is like third, fourth, fifth. It's just smatterings everywhere. So that can be, I think, a potential downfall. The hand of man is not necessarily obsolete in this process just yet.
Now, you completely distracted me with that expression, jumps the shark, because saw an article this week. It's the 50th anniversary of Henry Winkler making his debut as Fonzie in Happy Days. Did you know that?
I did not. But I've been to the Henry Winkler statue before and given a little aid to the Fonz. So.
Hey. Right, back to the topic. So, we worry that there's also a dark side to AI tools like ChatGPT, because, of course, in the hands of scammers. There's the potential for them making phishing emails a load more convincing, and ensuring that authentic email communication has become even more critical. So do you think we're going to get to a point where it's going to be like near impossible to distinguish human versus AI generated communications?
I think that dystopian future is probably far away. It takes a lot for an AI to get the appearance of light. And if you've ever tried to like create a chat bot and have an exchange with them, it only has a certain amount of responses that it will keep. After that, it kind of loses the thread. So you can have a philosophical debate with a bot, but after a while, it will get repetitive or redundant because it just simply runs out of things to draw from and sources to draw from, and can't quite synthesize a brand new original thought. Although there are some shops that are attempting to try and do that, which is where they're trying to get into like independently functioning AI, and that has had mixed reviews so far.
Although I have to tell you, just before we move on to our next question, that a few episodes back, we had the team from Spamhaus join us on Email After Hours, and they told us a remarkable story. Danielle knows where I'm going with this, because they told us that they suddenly realized that they were seeing a distinct upshift in the quality of the please delist us from our Spamhaus blocklisting tickets that they were receiving, and suddenly realized that sort of the offending senders had cottoned on to the idea of, hey, ChatGPT, please help me craft the sort of most effective ticket possible to maximize my chances of getting Spamhaus to delist me. And they suddenly realized that there was like a very common appearance to a whole load of tickets that they were receiving, and they were all ChatGPT generated. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually sometimes is a good thing because not everyone that sits behind the desk is the most eloquent person. So being able to formulate those thoughts off of concise data points certainly has its uses. But you talk about the dark side of things. A dark side of that can be that submission forms can be automatically populated and filled out. And therefore, the people that are trying to help and trying to do the right thing and trying to delist people who really should be delisted will get inundated and flooded with requests as bots just rattle off page after page after page.
Although I do love the idea of all the folks at Spamhaus being like, wow, everybody's being so thoughtful.
Right,
So
wow.
sick,
Hey,
right?
People have been really verbose lately. Yeah.
Until it catches up with them, like that moment of realization I would have liked to have seen. But another thing that we've chatted about on the podcast before, and I think something that Guy, this is something you've brought up. Eric, what's your take on the use of safe words or watermarks for email authentication or creating some type of legitimacy? Like, how do we go beyond basic authentication? And I know this is a loaded question, but maybe what's the next big thing in keeping email secure?
That's a good question because there are articles from creators of AI, Google, having some reticence about unleashing their creation. And they do that just from the standpoint of not being able to put the genie back in the bottle, right? So we're kind of already at that point. So the question then becomes, as AI becomes better and better, and images created by AI becomes better and better, and email that AI creates becomes better and better, how do we ensure that that communication is authentic between two people? Because when I read an email, I can't look that person in the face. I can't read their expression. I can't look in their eyes. And so that is certainly a great question. And I don't honestly think that there is a great answer to it. But as you mentioned, taking means to ensure that something is authentic. When AI gets to the point where they can talk to you for 5 minutes and get all the vowel sounds and enough consonants to fake your voice, what happens when you get a phone call from your mother saying, I need you to send money, I'm in trouble? Or a child sends their parents something like that. I think that as a general guideline, you can avoid the bad guys, for lack of a better term, by establishing some kind of process by which you ensure, be it a safe word, a watermark, something to ensure that what is being sent is, in fact, from me and authentic. And it used to be that you would have key signage and things like that would ensure that the sender is who they say they are. That's the whole point behind some of these authentication measures. But now it's creeping out of the email theater and into pretty much everything else. And so phone calls can come from auto dialers, and people are saying, well, don't say don't say hello or this is, just too many words. You just let it roll to voicemail and let the automated voicemail get it so that they can't get your voice. I don't
Wow.
think that I don't think that we've gotten that far down the rabbit hole yet, because you would have a lot of bad guys doing it, and then you would have a lot of people complaining and a lot of legislators trying to adopt laws. But I think that it, just like with any consumer of email, any kind of consumer of any message of any kind, if the message seems off kilter, out of character, just have some way of saying, is this you? Be it suddenly shifting the conversation to talk about the bananas you had yesterday, or whatever it might be. Something that's artificial won't necessarily have that context, unless, of course, you commonly talk about bananas, and then they would have that history. But it would just have to be something that would be distinct, much like a key is in DKIM. It's distinct to that sender. This would be a phrase or some sort of way of authenticating.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. Got to tell you, I mean, speaking personally, I'm never going to have to worry about a funds transfer fraud from my mother. She's the last of the tech refuseniks. She's never used email. She'd never owned a smartphone. She doesn't even have a TV. I mean, fraud's going to come from her. It's going to have to be like carrier pigeon or something.
Mine's a similar way, although she has a phone. I am lifelong tech support for free for that phone. So
my sister gets that from me. Anyhow, back to AI. I mean, we've already talked about how it's changing the email game in so many different ways. And a moment ago, you were talking about how it's being used to drive IP warming tools, where you've got bots mimicking engagement to boost deliverability. I've also heard rumors that the scammers have cottoned on to the idea of what a powerful deliverability signal this is not spam notifications are, and that they're using their bots to achieve recovered from spam actions at scale, which is pretty clever. But, it starts to become an ethical conversation, doesn't it? Where do we draw the line between smart tactics and abuse?
absolutely. And I think that what a lot of senders lose is that providers like Gmail and Yahoo and list providers like Spamhaus, they're honestly trying to protect their people. And so the measures that they take are fundamentally to protect people under their umbrella, that rely on them to keep Persian princes, send me $1, I'll send you 1,000,000 emails out of your mom and my mom's inbox, because they might not know any better. So there is a watcher on the wall that's the postmaster and their crew, trying to keep everybody safe. I think if that frames the conversation that we're having about this, then you look at things like artificiality and, for lack of a better term, faking in this process. And way before AI, you could program a macro to just take your mouse and click and then do another thing and click on buttons. So it's not necessarily a new thing, but the challenge of AI is doing it at scale. For senders, I think that the prevailing message is that there's no substitute for authentic human-to-human communication in this process. And attempting to shortcut them, while it might net you a dividend, let's say you have an AI bot farm that clicks on things and gets you in good with one specific provider over another, eventually it's going to get caught up, because the good guys have really smart people too. And I don't exactly know what the situation is and what that solution is going to be, which is kind of why I'm on these working groups and listening in to what they're talking about. But ultimately, I don't think anybody wants to steal other people's money. No legitimate sender of mail is going to tolerate that type of activity, right? And so while doing things like mass marking not a spam or mass opening, mass clicking, it isn't necessarily outright prohibited, but it does kind of cheat those protections and try and circumvent those protections. So then the conversation needs to shift then to, well, if people have to do this in order to get into a particular provider's mailbox, is that provider too strict? Or is what they're doing not enough?
Guy, I told you before we started recording that I wasn't going to talk about online dating again. But I am, only because when you said, I know you meant mass engagement or whatever, but when you said mass unsubscribe, I thought about this example back when I worked on the client side, and it wasn't AI. I guess AI is just code anyway. But I was working on the sender side, and they were essentially online dating websites and associated email marketing programs. And this one person, I guess, had like, I don't know, a particularly bad date or like caught their partner on one of these sites or whatever, and wrote a script to mass complain. So we ended up with like tens of thousands of spam complaints. And luckily, in this case, it was like one particular mailbox provider that just happened to be a provider that was under the sender certification umbrella. But can you imagine if that was now, given like all of the different thresholds that have started to be established? Like it could cause such a nightmare if it's, forget the IP warming strategy, but what if it's the other thing? What if it's more nefarious from like a competitor perspective or something? That's crazy.
Right, and I think the providers are pretty smart. They've got some smart people working there, and just like the back in the old days when people would just accumulate mail in the mailbox and mark them all as spam, and suddenly the needle would move in terms of sender score or something like that. You would have all those practice people doing that type of thing, and then the providers got smart to that type of behavior and said, well, if all these complaints come at once from the same location, then we're probably not going to treat it like 50 complaints from different locations. This is just one person being aggro like that. So with bots doing the same, it'll be a little bit difficult, but I think that there's ways of maybe seeding metadata into those types of responses that come back to the provider that can help them identify these types of things. It might not necessarily be as obvious as everything coming from the same IP, the same destination. Oh, all these complaints came from inside the house. Well, yeah, okay, yeah, but but the thing that AI can do is it can spread that response over multiple IPs and log in from multiple places and multiple accounts, and theoretically speaking, could be set up all over the world. So the challenge that's going to be put to providers is to not only ensure that the person communications are authentic, or businesses to person, or businesses to businesses, the communication is authentic, but they also want to make sure and ensure that feedback that is authentic as well.
I'm going to move a little bit away from the purely email marketing realm and just get into a couple of broader AI questions. And I have this one not only because there have been tons of articles and exposés on this particular topic, but because I also got a birthday message last year from a colleague of ours, Guy Raff, that was essentially, he made his own deep fake. And I think deep fakes are like really stressful and scary. And we have big political figures or really important people that this can happen to, of course, especially they have a lot of available data where we can hear them speaking, pronouncing, being clear. And so more of maybe a philosophical question here than an email one, but when we're all consuming so much digital media, how do AI generated fakes impact our perception of the truth, I guess?
That's a very good question. There's a very famous Obama fake that's out there and made rounds. And anyone that's in a position of power and a position of public facing could be subject to this type of thing. So fortunately, we're not quite at a place yet where my stolen image and the AI making my mouth move in a certain way isn't organic enough that it can really pass if you're careful and you're conscientious and you scrutinize it. But I think that the trouble is that there's a large subset of humanity out there that doesn't scrutinize. We're digesting tweets in 250 words. We're having TikTok sound bites, and our attention just goes from one to the next to the next. And it doesn't necessarily leave a lot of room for that scrutiny unless there's repeat viewings or things like that. And it's not necessarily super common to see a TikTok or a reel or a Vine or whatever you're consuming your media on and look at it and go, huh, okay, that's not right. Let me see that again. Usually it's view and then I'm firing off an angry 250 words, or I'm giving it a thumbs up and I'm moving on. It certainly makes it difficult, especially when there are movers and shakers trying to influence you. And ultimately that influence is what they're trying to get. They're trying to influence you to vote a certain way, to be angry about a certain thing, to feel a way that they want people to feel. And it's very easy, particularly in the US. We have a lot of like, and this isn't necessarily a commentary on cancel culture, although that's kind of a side effect of it, right? It's just this reactionary responsiveness. And when media just comes at us rapid fire from every different direction, and we try to give it our attention, And in spreading ourselves so thin, we make ourselves vulnerable to that type of intrusion of, for lack of a better term, untruth into our lives. So it's scary when it comes to the political season, just because that has a lot of bearing on everybody's lives. Policy determine quite a lot and can influence the world. So I think that probably is also a concern for larger authorities than a poor email deliverability jockey. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people at departments of defense that are working at things like that. But even then, any security is only as competent as its weakest link. And there are very specific spear phishing attempts in the Clinton campaign years ago, where just one little person clicks the thing and then whoop, got him. And you can see all this type of things that you normally aren't going to be able to. And it's a similar type of thing. So with AI and then the way that media is consumed, I don't think that there's necessarily one specific cure-all for it. I think that the trouble is that it needs to be a grassroots, socially engineered solution. It needs viewers of media to be skeptical and just question, like, okay, my political candidate said a thing, but it seems awful bombastic, or it seems out of character, or it seems mean, or it seems.
But he wasn't blinking when he delivered.
Exactly. Well, and it has ramifications beyond that, beyond the political theater. There were some Taylor Swift fakes. I think it was Charlize Theron or some actress. There was another fake of hers. And on a local level, mean-spirited boys made deep fakes of people in their class. So there's a larger problem when it comes to this. And I think number one is an ethical one. I think when it comes to people who create these images, they have to think, well, is this a good thing that I'm doing? Or is this a bad thing that I'm doing? And I get it. Bad people are out there. Not everyone's going to make that thought.
You've already almost segued us into this, but of course we have 10,000 questions about AI, so we have to do a big circle to get back to it. And Guy, you've recently found out you have an election coming up. Is that right?
It is. And for our US listeners, you're probably going to be amazed, because the sort of election cycle in the UK is all of 6 weeks from it being declared to voting day. And it still feels like a bloody long time. We're sort of 3 weeks in, and we're just also bored with the election already. It's just like, bring on election and be done with it, please.
And Eric, you were talking about, especially in the way that your image might be used to influence voters, or an image might be used to influence voters politically. Dare I ask, do you think AI is going to be shaping the U.S. election outcome this year?
I think they're going to try. You can't see AI keep popping up in the news like this, because it's the kind of the iceberg syndrome, right? What you see in the news is probably kind of just the tip of that iceberg in terms of what's going on in places where people way smarter than me are talking about and trying to do these things. And it's not even just AI. People will overlay a person's image, say Morgan Freeman, with a quote attributed to them that just really Morgan Freeman never ever said. Right?
If it comes from Morgan Freeman, it must be trusted, right?
He played God, right? So but people do that because he's trusted. He has that auspice about him. He has that kind of elderly wisdom about him. And if you put some quote on him, even if he didn't say it, sure, yeah, you kind of get a little underground Mandela effect going on of like, well, did he say that? Is that real? Was that the quote? Is that really attributed to him? And then of course you go online and try and find it, and no, in fact he didn't. But then 250,000 people have liked, thumbs up, and shared that misinformation before it gets a chance to either be addressed as such. So people can do that with, and that's just static. That's just memes, right? There's just somebody on meme generator and boop.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Eric, but I'm picturing like a really stoic looking picture of Trump. Sorry if such a thing exists, with like, the only thing to fear is fear. It's like some really profound, just like.
Exactly. And you can whip up your base with that. So if you get a picture of him a look of consternation on his face at a trial that people are already outraged by, and then you put some sort of inspirational stick it to the man quote underneath there, and everyone's going to be like, yeah, he was robbed, I'm going to get behind this. And then suddenly you've created a swell in that base. And I think that if you have many images where it's just a static picture, but then an audio underneath it, you've seen those before, it will evolve and it will become a moving picture. And I think that it's kind of the responsibility of the people who disseminate that media to address this. What is Meta doing? What is Facebook doing? What is X doing to ensure that those things are authentic, and if they are discovered in fact to be fake, to take them down quickly before they propagate. But with everything moving so fast in the digital world, it really is a challenge to do. And you get a lot of confirmation bias as well. So a lot of those things circle around in kind of little echo chambers and get shared around, but it also has that exact same function, whipping up the base. Republicans are evil, Democrats are evil, this one candidate is the devil himself, this one candidate is senile. It just on and on, round and round it goes, right? And the largest single most powerful weapon against misinformation is education. If you were to hand a fake dollar bill to a person who's educated about fake dollar bills, they hold it up to the light, they don't see the thing, they get a pen and do the thing, they're going to spot it. And they'll be, yeah, this is fake. And I think that society as a whole and consumers of digital media as a whole need to do that. And younger generations are getting smarter about this thing, because I am of a certain specific age where we have one toe in the physical and one toe in the digital, just because that all evolved kind of under our watch. I remember rotary phones. I now have a smartphone. But the younger generation now, all they've ever known is smartphones. And this digital sea is the muck they swim in, right? So they are very conscious and savvy about negotiating it. But I think, at least in my dealings with younger folks, they still tend to be prone to manipulation and things of that nature. So I think that they just need to get smarter about it. And as things become a danger, to take an analogy from my day, don't put your hand on the stove, it's hot. As the kids learn, like, don't open this thing, there's virus, or don't open this thing, it's fake, they'll start to get smarter. But a lot of people are going to get burned before that kind of it enters the social consciousness.
Danielle, you alluded to the UK election, and we might not have some of these problems here. There was a TV debate this week, and Sir Keir Starmer, who is probably going to be our next Prime Minister, let's just say he's not the most exciting guy in the world. And in this TV debate, they were taking questions from the audience, and this youngster, this student, stands up and goes, "Sir Keir, you are just like so robotic. Is there a real person inside, and are we going to see him one day?"
The missed opportunity for him to be at the pulpit and start, doing the robot dance.
That's right.
I'd vote for that guy if he did that.
It was quite a moment. We're going to have to wrap up. This has been such an awesome conversation today. It's been so interesting. And Eric Stell, thank you for joining us. It's been a rip, and you've been very generous with your insights and your anecdotes. I think our audience is going to take a load out of today's conversation. But
it's been my pleasure.
Just before we let you go, we started with a quick fire question, and we're going to close with one as well. And we're going to make it topical today. I think when we discuss AI, top of mind question is always, is it going to take our jobs? So is it? For all of us sitting here in the world of email marketing, should we be worried that AI is going to be putting us into early retirement?
Not yet. I think things have a long way to go. And it gets back to what I said about generated images. I'll start to worry when I can generate an image and it has proper fingers and teeth. But it certainly, when there's a support meme there and I think it was part of the IT crowd. But basically, when you call into a tech support line, they just put you on hold, then Google what the answer is and come back, right? Well, I mean, AI rapid fire does that. So if Google has an AI assistant now, and so if someone says, "Why am I getting blocked at Google?" or "Why is my reputation low at Google?" Well, the AI assistant will now start putting those facts in front of them. But I think that based on my experience with folks reading the very detailed and very specific guidelines that providers put up, and that every single provider is different. In the email marketing space, I don't quite worry, because it's science, true. There are facts, there are empirical data, but there's also an art to it. There's reading a certain reaction from a provider. Oh, Yahoo's deferring. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, it says this one thing, but really what it means is that they're blocking you because they're going to say this one thing and just defer you into the ground, and then your mail just fails out after a while. So you have to be able to interpret that, and where an AI might see, oh, okay, well, you're being deferred, there is no problem. Well, okay, but that's not the case. So I think that so long as it's a hybrid of art and science like that, we won't necessarily be replaced.
I love that, Eric. I think that's such a wonderful way to end. I'm going to add a chapter to my future memoir called The Art of Email Marketing.
It really is. There's a lot of tea leaf
There's a
reading.
lot. Yeah,
And remember, Danielle, you can know every body part you got, but that doesn't mean you can operate on yourself.
Nope.
absolutely.
You can play the game of
Absolutely.
Operation ad nauseum, but that doesn't mean
There
you're
we go. So many good
qualified.
learnings from today.
Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing all of your amazing insights. For our listeners, of course, we'll be back in just 2 weeks with another episode of Email After Hours. So be sure to tune in.
Bye now.
My pleasure.
Be sure to tune in next time and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget to visit senderscore.com for loads more great resources to help you become a stronger sender.
To all you sleepless senders out there, thank you for joining us after hours and see you next time.